When the Kremlin speaks, the world listens. But when the Kremlin acts in silence, the world should tremble. There is a specific language in global power dynamics, a grammar of movement that precedes the roar of engines and the launch of missiles. Today, that language has delivered a message that cannot be ignored. Russia has just crossed a threshold that marks the end of diplomatic ambiguity. Moscow is officially urging its citizens to leave the Islamic Republic of Iran. To the untrained eye, this may look like a routine travel advisory, a cautious move by a protective state. To those who understand the cold logic of the Russian high command, it is something far more chilling. It is a strategic withdrawal. It is the clearing of the battlefield. It is the final warning before the fog of war descends. In the corridors of power in Washington, London, and Tel Aviv, this move is being analyzed with surgical precision. Russia does not panic. Russia does not react to rumors. Every move made by Moscow is a calculated step in a broader, multi-generational game of chess. When the Russian Foreign Ministry issues a directive of this magnitude, it is not based on newspaper headlines. It is based on raw, actionable intelligence gathered by the GRU and the SVR. It means that Moscow has seen something that the rest of the world is only beginning to suspect. They have seen the cracks in the foundation. They have detected a shift in the regional equilibrium that is now irreversible. The relationship between Moscow and Tehran has long been a marriage of convenience, a tactical alliance forged in the fires of Western sanctions and shared geopolitical interests. However, this alliance is now facing its most grueling test. By removing its nationals, Russia is signaling to the Iranian leadership that it will not be a hostage to an escalation it did not choose. This is the doctrine of anticipation in its purest form. Moscow is distancing itself from the blast radius, both literally and figuratively. For years, the presence of Russian technicians, advisors, and citizens across Iran served as an informal human shield. Their presence was a silent guarantee that any massive external strike on Iranian soil would risk killing Russian nationals, thereby forcing Moscow into a direct confrontation with the West. That shield has now been dismantled. By calling its people home, Russia is effectively telling the world that the theater is now open. The deterrent is gone. Why now? To understand the urgency, we must look at the internal state of the Iranian apparatus. For months, reports have filtered out regarding deep-seated vulnerabilities within the security services. There is a persistent fragility, a sense that the internal cohesion of the state is being stretched to a breaking point. Moscow's intelligence suggests that the risk of a sudden tilt, a rapid, uncontrollable shift in the domestic or regional status quo, is no longer a theoretical possibility, but an imminent reality. Whether it is the pressure of a looming succession, the infiltration of foreign intelligence deep into the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, or the shadow of a high-tech surgical strike, Russia has decided that the risk of staying outweighs the benefit of the alliance. This is not merely about protecting lives. It is about protecting the state's freedom of maneuver. If a major kinetic event were to occur tomorrow, Moscow needs to be in a position where it can choose its response without being forced into a corner by the loss of its own personnel. This is the hallmark of Russian strategic thinking. Never allow the enemy, or even your ally, to dictate your entry into a conflict. By clearing the ground, Moscow regains its tactical flexibility. It can condemn, it can mediate, or it can intervene, but it will do so on its own terms and at its own time. The timing also suggests a profound distrust in the current regional communication channels. The hotlines between major powers are buzzing, yet the silence from Moscow regarding its specific reasons for this evacuation is deafening. This silence creates a vacuum of information that is being filled by the worst-case scenarios. In the world of high-stakes geopolitics, uncertainty is a weapon. By acting now, Russia is forcing its adversaries to second-guess their own intelligence. What does Moscow know that we don't? Have they detected a specific flight path? Have they intercepted a final order? The ambiguity itself is a form of psychological warfare designed to freeze the decision-making processes of Washington and its allies. Historically, when Russia begins to pull back its assets from a partner nation, it is a precursor to a seismic shift. We saw this in the weeks leading up to the most significant European conflicts of the 21st century. The pattern is consistent. The diplomatic rhetoric remains steady, The official statements remain supportive, but the physical presence on the ground evaporates. It is a cold, clinical separation. Moscow is essentially saying to Tehran, "We have provided the tools, we have provided the support, but we will not share your fate if the ceiling collapses." This move also sends a devastating message to the global markets and the energy corridors of the Middle East. If the world's primary security partner for Iran is heading for the exits, it signals that the stability we have witnessed over the last few years was merely a facade. We are entering a period of hyper-instability, where the rules of the game are being rewritten in real time. The pressure on the Iranian economy, already strained by years of isolation, will only intensify as the psychological impact of this Russian withdrawal takes hold. It creates a sense of abandonment, a feeling that the only great power capable of balancing Western influence has decided that the Iranian ship is no longer seaworthy. We must also consider the message this sends to the United States. For Washington, the Russian evacuation is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it removes a significant complication for any potential military planning. Without Russian citizens in the way, the collateral damage equation changes significantly. On the other hand, it signals that Russia expects a conflict of such magnitude that it cannot guarantee the safety of its people. This is an admission that the situation has moved beyond the point of diplomatic repair. It is a recognition that the gray zone of hybrid warfare and proxy skirmishes is about to give way to something far more direct and far more dangerous. As the Russian transport planes begin their journeys back to Moscow, the strategic landscape of the Middle East is being fundamentally altered. The brouillard stratégique, the strategic fog, is thickening. We are no longer talking about if a crisis will occur, but when and how it will manifest. Russia has made its move. It has read the tea leaves of global intelligence and decided that the risk of remaining in Iran is a price too high to pay. They are stepping back into the shadows, waiting for the inevitable storm to break. In the game of empires, the first to leave the table is often the one who knows exactly when the house is about to fall. The question now is not why Russia is leaving, but what they are leaving behind, and who will be left to face the consequences when the silence finally breaks. The departure of Russian personnel from Iranian soil is not merely a logistical shift. It is the catalyst for a systemic collapse of the regional order as we have known it for decades. When the traditional mediator and primary security guarantor of a nation suddenly vacates the premises, it creates a strategic vacuum of such magnitude that the surrounding powers are pulled in by an irresistible force of gravity. Power, by its very nature, abhors a vacuum. In the hyper-tense environment of 2026, this vacuum is being filled by paranoia, rapid mobilization, and the terrifying prospect of a conflict that no longer has any guardrails. We are witnessing the birth of a total war scenario, where the absence of Russian influence removes the final layer of restraint from both the Islamic Republic and its primary adversaries in the West and the Levant. The first and most immediate consequence of this Russian retreat is the radical alteration of the military calculus in Washington and Tel Aviv. For years, any planned kinetic operation against Iranian nuclear or military infrastructure had to account for the Russian variable. Planners had to navigate the risk of hitting Russian assets, which would have triggered a direct confrontation with a nuclear-armed Kremlin. By removing this variable, Moscow has effectively handed its rivals a blank check, but it is a check written in blood. The red lines that once governed the shadow war between Israel and Iran have vanished. Without Russian technicians to maintain air defense systems or Russian advisors to provide a diplomatic backchannel, the Iranian leadership now perceives itself as being in a state of terminal isolation. A cornered power is the most dangerous actor on the global stage. If Tehran believes that an existential strike is now inevitable because the Russian shield has been lowered, their doctrine shifts from deterrence to the Samson option, a policy of ensuring that if the regime falls, the entire region and the global economy falls with it. This brings us to the most volatile economic choke point on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. Global markets are already pricing in the Russian exit. The logic is cold and unforgiving. If Russia is no longer invested in the stability of the Iranian state, it has no reason to discourage Iran from using its most potent economic weapon. Closing the Strait of Hormuz through which 20% of the world's liquid petroleum passes, would send oil prices into a vertical climb, potentially breaching the $300 per barrel mark within days. For a global economy already struggling with the fragmenting of supply chains and the transition to new energy paradigms, this would be a death blow. The hidden consequence of Russia's move is that, as a major energy exporter itself, Moscow actually stands to gain from the resulting chaos. While the West scrambles to contain an energy apocalypse, Russia would watch from the sidelines as its own reserves become the only viable alternative for a desperate world. This is the hidden consequence that many analysts are afraid to name. Russia is not just avoiding a war. They may be facilitating a crisis that destroys the economic dominance of their enemies. Furthermore, the impact on the axis of resistance cannot be overstated. From the shores of Lebanon to the mountains of Yemen, the proxies that rely on the Iran-Russia-China triad are now facing a crisis of confidence. If Moscow has abandoned the heart of the alliance, what does that mean for the wings? We are likely to see a surge in asymmetric activity as these groups realize that the window for action is closing. The fog of war is not just a metaphor, it is a tactical reality. When intelligence channels go dark and diplomats flee, the only language left is the language of force. We are seeing a massive buildup of naval assets in the Eastern Mediterranean and the Persian Gulf, a gathering of iron that mirrors the darkest days of the 20th century. The United States now faces a paradox. The removal of Russian citizens makes a strike easier, but the lack of Russian mediation makes a total regional conflagration almost certain. The role of China in this shifting landscape adds another layer of complexity. Beijing has long relied on the Russo-Iranian partnership to secure its energy needs and to act as a counterweight to American influence in Eurasia. With Russia pulling back, China is left in a precarious position. Does it step in to fill the void, risking a direct entanglement in a Middle Eastern quagmire, or does it follow Russia's lead and retreat into a defensive posture? This hesitation by the world's second-largest economy creates further instability. The global order is no longer multipolar. It is fragmenting into isolated, warring blocs where the old rules of engagement have been discarded. The strategic fog is now so thick that even the most advanced satellite surveillance and signals intelligence cannot predict the next move. We are operating in a state of pure chaos. The climax of this geopolitical shift is the realization that we have reached the point of no return. The fatal mistake that historians will look back on is the belief that this was a manageable crisis. It is not. The departure of Moscow is the signal that the diplomatic era has ended and the era of kinetic reorganization has begun. This is the moment where the global order, established in the aftermath of 1945 and refined after 1991, officially collapses. The shockwaves will be felt in every household, from the price of fuel to the stability of the digital networks that govern modern life. The Iranian plateau is no longer just a regional flashpoint. It has become the epicenter of a global realignment. As we look toward the immediate future, the uncertainty is absolute. Will the departure of Russian citizens be followed by a preemptive strike that ignites the oil fields? Or will the sheer terror of what comes next force a temporary, fragile silence? The reality is that the deterrence of the last decade was built on a foundation of Russian presence. With that foundation gone, the structure is swaying. The pressure on the United States and its allies is now at an all-time high. Every move they make is being watched by adversaries who are no longer afraid of a coordinated global response. The world is watching a high-stakes game of chicken where the participants are driving at full speed into a wall of fog. When the history of 2026 is written, the day Russia ordered its citizens out of Iran will be marked as the day the silence became unbearable. It was the day the world realized that the safety nets had been cut. The escalation we are seeing is not a ladder, it is a cliff. As the last Russian transport planes clear Iranian airspace, they leave behind a nation that is prepared for the end, and a global community that is utterly unprepared for the beginning of what comes next. The strategic fog has not just thickened, it has become a permanent feature of our new reality. The lights are going out across the diplomatic map, and in the darkness, the machines of war are beginning to hum. The transition from a world of controlled tension to a world of uncontrolled collision is now complete. What remains to be seen is who will be left standing when the mist finally clears.